Our next speaker is Dr. Miriam Borham-Puyal. She's a senior lecturer at the English department of the University of Salamanca. She has authored pieces on women writers from the 17th to the 21st century. Moreover, she is the editor of a volume on rewritings of Frankenstein, which places particular emphasis on film, television, video games, and V-blogs, published in 2018. Her most recent book is Contemporary Rewritings of Liminal Women, Echoes of the Past, published in 2020 by Routledge, which explores the liminal figures of the female vampire, detective, quixote, and prostitute in past and present popular narratives. So the title of her presentation today is Rewriting the 19th Century, Contemporary Stage Adaptations of Frankenstein by Women. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you for the other panelists for this beautiful presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to start. So Mary Shelley's masterpiece, Frankenstein, published in 1818, was very soon adapted for the stage with great success and an enduring impact on subsequent versions. We know that in 1821, a play appeared in French. In 1823, two dramatizations were produced in England, while the 19th century saw many versions in both countries, reaching a global scale in the following century. The fascination Shelley's work has for theatre audiences and its adaptability to different visions and times was evinced once more with the 2011 production directed by Danny Boyle and scripted by Nick Dear. Yet while the early 19th century versions and Dear's have received ample critical attention, and with good reason, others, in particular some stage versions penned by women, have not. On the other hand, in an interview on the occasion of the opening of his production, Dear claimed that there was nothing gendered in his approach to the novel or his adaptation, also asserting that Wollstonecraft's feminism is nowhere to be found in her daughter's novel. He goes even further, suggesting that Elizabeth, and I quote, with a little help, might be persuaded to grow into an interesting character, end of quote, despite her traditional homely ambitions, as he describes them. Yet Dear also acknowledged that without feminist criticism by scholars such as Anne Meller, he might not have even considered the implications regarding pregnancy and birth that exist in the novel, or how Shelley's own maternal experience plays into her creation. Although in the end, he decided against interweaving her story into his production as other versions had done. This led me to wonder whether adaptations penned by women would approach Shelley's novel differently, especially as Dear's own version is quite emphatic in its use of women as victims of the male ego and bodies to be gazed at or abused on stage, while a giant mechanic womb substitutes for the mother figure. It's the image that you have at the bottom. If you haven't watched it, suddenly there's a flash of light and a baby-like creature is expelled from this womb. Taking this into account, this paper wishes quite tentatively, okay, this is a disclaimer, first to contribute to the discussion on the theatrical afterlives of Shelley's piece by providing a brief overview of the existing dramatic and musical adaptations created by women, and secondly, by analyzing three of them to explore common places around the figure of the woman writer, the mother, and the commodification of women's bodies. Firstly, using existing resources, such as those on screen, Stephen L. Forey's Hideous Progenies, and Philip Bolton's Women Writers Dramatize, a calendar of performances from narrative works published in English to 1900, in particular his chapter devoted to Mary Shelley's adaptation to the stage and the screen, it is possible to trace a compelling story of the dramatic rewritings of Frankenstein throughout different times, places, and media. Not only have different versions of Shelley's classic found their way almost uninterruptedly onto the stage for more than 200 years, but they have done so in ways that highlight the wealth and malleability of the Ur text, ranging from comedies and musicals to tragedies and spoofs. providing different answers to the questions of who the monster is, how monsters are shaped within a social context, and what makes us human, addressing various fears as the narrative projects itself towards the future. Moreover, adaptations, as we know, have a snowballing effect. They create a cumulative hypertext or a universal cultural currency, paraphrasing Robert Stamm and Thomas Leich, respectively. In this sense, Marta Vega, in the book previously mentioned, or Frankenstein Revisited, has attested the ways in which the first stage adaptation gave the Frankensteinian tradition one of its most recognizable traits today, the assistant, whether in a comic or tragic tone, who has determined in part the success of well-known films, as we all know, for example, Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein. However, a first look at the stage adaptations of Shelley's novel also evinces that the number of women playwrights who have scripted or composed one of these rewritings is still not very high when compared to their male counterparts. So using the aforementioned sources plus my own exploration to find more recent stage productions has resulted in the following list, although it's partly covered. Well, there are only two there, which includes both the more obvious versions of the novel and more displaced rewritings in which Mary Shelley's life may feature more prominently or be seen via the Frankenstein story. As you can see, I found two prior to the 60s. So we are well aware of Peggy Webling's because of her influence in the Wales film. But you can see that from the 60s, we start to have more women adapting this for the stage. It is not just a matter of acknowledgement. Many of these works have proven not easily available, and access to them might prove difficult or impossible, for extant copies of the play or bill may not even exist. In fact, many of these entries in Forey's and Bolton's catalogues do not have any other reference besides a first production date, tentative in some cases, and a theatre or company, and the name of the author, which if you then try to track, might not even appear. They have only this one play. Therefore, much research is still to be conducted to get a full picture of this corpus and its significance for the reception of Shelley's text in English. That these works would prove relevant for our understanding of Frankenstein's reception will hopefully be evinced by the discussion of three of these plays, the ones in bold, written by women. One, penned by Marjorie Bicknell, staged in 1981, entitled Frankenstein, is catalogued by both scholars, yet the other two, much more recent, have not been included in these type of studies before. On the one hand, Frankenstein by Lisa Evans, first performed in 2008 at Northampton Royal, and later published together with Bryony Lavery's Dracula under the title Two Horror Plays. On the other hand, Mary's Monster, written and performed by Maggie Lou Rader as recent as 2018 for the bicentenary. Now, Marjorie Bicknell's play received really good reviews. It won 3 Joseph Jefferson Awards, which are the awards for excellency in the theatre in Chicago, when it was first staged in 1981 and was published a year later. Bicknell makes some interesting artistic choices, such as preserving Walton's narrative frame and his interaction with Victor to highlight how he also works as his double, or involving Henry Clerval in The Creature's Birth, this time as Frankenstein's sidekick and the provider of his literary education. In this sense, Bicknell's play recovers aspects of the original Clerval, but also shows him as another facet of Frankenstein. At first, an enthusiast of the possibilities of their experiment and the innocence of his new being, then the father that revolts at his creature outward hideousness, and finally, who demands the creature's death for the crimes he has committed. That is, he embodies aspects of Shelley's Victor and his personal journey in the novel, while Bicknell's Victor Frankenstein displays more understanding of the creature's unintentional first kill, but callously continues with his experiments, even willing to use Justine's body to create a mate for the monster. Bicknell's Victor then precedes Kenneth Branagh's in his appropriation of the maid's desired body, a corporeal frame that has been previously praised and desired by Clerval, but also by the creature. Justine's narrative arc proves that all the male characters in the play place demands for fame, love, companionship, a family, and are willing to use those around them, especially women, to obtain them. Significant in the context of my discussion is Bicknell's treatment of the female characters in the novel. While they are still presented as victims of the male hubris, and their roles are basically love interests to Henry and Victor, both Justine and Elizabeth are given more agency and character development, increasing the audience's empathy towards them before they meet their terrible death at the hands of the creature. Bicknell also dignifies Justine from the role of sexualized mistress to the Baron, seen, for example, in the 1957 Curse of Frankenstein, which is also a very relevant rewriting. Justine's commodification, in fact, in some way enhances sympathy towards her and increases the audience's detachment from Victor when he tells Clerval, you have the quote there, "I'm not callous. Justine grew up in my house. I loved her and I will mourn her, but stopping our work and destroying the creature isn't going to bring her back. You will find another woman to love someday, Henry, but there will never be another Adam." End of quote. This right before he tries to manipulate him with the memory of Justine so he will agree to let him use her body. All this echoes Gilbert and Gubar's claim that the novel describes a woman's helpless alienation in a male society where they are all in the secret, they are clearly calling the shots and leaving all the women in the dark, while it also presents the female community in clear advantage to this monstrously male society. Because women in the play, as in the novel, are social creatures and care for others. They are vocal about their romantic feelings, and Elizabeth even hints at her awareness of the importance of the wedding night, therefore reclaiming the novel's portrait of Victor's fiancée as more grounded in the reality of her body and the social expectations around it. She is aware of her role as procreator and is willing to fulfill it even if Victor delays it, or rather replaces it with his chemically created child. Victor indeed describes Elizabeth as an object of adoration rather than as a living embodied woman. Rather than as a living woman. He describes her as a beautiful thing that he wished in his possession the moment she arrived at his home. And he tells Walton that he devoted himself to her, and as we know, constantly delays consummation. This finds its echo in the creature's desire to own Justine and own her body. But ironically, the creature introduces a more human and less divine approach to woman. He finds her body attractive, wants to have her for his own, and spend time with her away from everybody else. So it kind of moves towards Justine while Victor seems to move away from Elizabeth. And Henry suggests he might procreate with her. Bicknell cleverly, I think, exposes the dichotomy between body and mind, low and upper class women, and their reduction to bodies to enjoy or to saintly motherly figures. Finally, it is worth noting that Bicknell reclaims the absent mother. Madame Frankenstein is well alive and becomes the voice of reason as well as the possibility for redemption when she asks her son not to pursue the killer but start a new life. Importantly, her death is no longer the trigger to Victor's quest, therefore withdrawing the trauma of loss as motivation, leaving only ambition, which runs throughout the play. Secondly, together with Elizabeth and Justine, she embodies the notion of family, healthy emotional nurture and social responsibilities, which are disrupted in the novel with her death and later fall on the new motherly figure, which is Elizabeth. In the play, the creature asks Frankenstein if he has a family, and longs to have one. His lack of belonging triggers his act of cruelty, specifically denying Victor his own family through Elizabeth. While Victor and Henry attempt to educate the creature, they do not provide social and emotional context as the mother does. Therefore, we see they fail. In fact, Victor clarifies his role for the creature with the following words: "I am not your father. No woman gave birth to you. I am not your father. I am your creator." End of quote. In the end, the mother, Madame Frankenstein, the dead corpse in the novel and the embodiment of the power of creation, is vindicated, and she remains at the core of the Frankenstein state. She is the core of stability and the life that is going to continue, while Victor abandons his home to pursue his creature, this time literally and not metaphorically detached from human contact. In Lissa Evans' approach, women take the center stage, specifically a contemporary surrogate, Mary Shelley, who drifts in and out of the plot of the novel being represented on stage, and which seems to be the actual book, the material book she's reading and she holds in her hand. In this version, Mary is a young woman imprisoned in a psychiatric ward whom we finally discover has murdered her own baby by locking it in a freezer. Evans then explores a well-established reading of the novel, even if for Nick Dear it might not have been obvious, as expressed by Ellen Mears. And I quote, "Frankenstein is a birth myth. The motif of revulsion against newborn life and the drama of guilt, dread, and flight surrounding birth and its consequences. The emphasis is not upon what precedes birth, not upon birth itself, but upon what follows birth, the trauma of the afterbirth." Mary's progress in the play, from cold isolation to final confession and attempt to warm up towards or connect with her own sister, is mirrored by Victor's agony first in the North Pole, but then his final redemption in a fire with his creature. Mary, like the creature whom she once replaces on stage, is considered a monster by society. She's the murderous mother. And like Victor, she creates a being that she finally rejects. The images of monstrous motherhood are highlighted in the play with reminiscence of Victor's nightmare, in which his dead mother and Elizabeth conflate, Victor's physical revolt at a baby-like creature, or his use of the terms error or aberration for his monster, and more clearly when the monster asks, "Would you kill your own child?" And Victor detaches himself from him with a "You are not mine." Evans then focuses on the inner monster and the interchangeable roles of creator-monster. In her own words, she attempted to, and I quote, "illuminate the tale with a modern counterpart, one whose image leaps at us from the newspapers attached to the word monster, and that often seems to be women who kill children." She then connects this contemporary tale to the middle passages of Shelley's novel, in which the monster tells his version of events since being abandoned by his creator, in an attempt to provide what she calls answers to the pressing question of what triggers such monstrous acts. Moreover, Evans does not diminish the horror of Mary's or Victor's acts, nor of their guilt, but offers a small chance of redemption by claiming that in her vision, and I quote, excuse me, "The monster's final acknowledgement of his crime against innocence might be a beginning of the process of moving from ice to warmth, from denial to acceptance for our modern monster." According to Evans, her monsters model on two cases of women who descended into violence after the loss of a beloved parent. In the play, Mary's mother, who committed suicide. Thus, Evan also establishes a clear connection with Mary Shelley and her own traumas of loss connected to motherhood as the trigger for the creation of a hideous progeny that would haunt her. This is also the central element in Rader's Mary's Monster, one of the several plays, even with this title, that sees the literary text via the events in Villa Diodati and Mary's tragic life, or vice versa. The play revolves entirely around Mary and her memories of love, loss, and literature, which brings the events concerning the death of Shelley's mother and children into sharp focus within the context of her own ambitions as a writer. The central theme seems the guilt Mary experiences after sacrificing so much in order to write, and how the process of giving birth to a child and to a work of art share the same uncertainty and even pain. Throughout the play, Mary complains of pain in her head and her womb, and is haunted by her dead children and her literary creatures. More importantly, her final address, as you see on screen, is to her own mother, whom she proclaims has transformed her into a monster, a creator of more than human life, and therefore somehow cursed her. And also because she starts her own life by killing her own mother. By playing with the replication of the mother-daughter name, Rader creates this game of doubles between real and literary creator and creature, mother and daughter, or father and son in her novel, and provides a comment on Shelley's anxiety of authorship and influence, and her negotiation of the 19th century roles of genius, daughter, wife, and mother, evoking in a way Mary Poovy's analysis of the novel as a myth of female powerlessness that leads to an uncontrollable urge for self-expression for the woman writer. In conclusion, while the corpus is still limited, it has already highlighted the existence of recurrent aspects that deserve more attention. In particular, the focus of these plays on literal or literary motherhood and the nature or origin of monstrosity demands to be discussed in greater depth. Furthermore, a second stage in this research would not only consider widening the corpus to include Peggy Weblin's influential texts or Emma Tennant's original teleplay on surrogate motherhood, where Victor Frankenstein actually gets pregnant, but also to provide an exploration of the adaptations which focus on the female characters surrounding Frankenstein or his creature, to consider the gendered approaches to this classic's rewriting. In this sense, a first look at the compiled corpus of stage and film dramatization advances interesting grounds for research on the relevance given to the marginalized female characters of the novel, or the nuances of transforming the titular scientist into a woman. Just to give you some examples, titles include the well-known 1935 The Bride of Frankenstein, which seemingly opens the way, and is later followed in 1958 with Frankenstein's Daughter, in which a descendant of Frankenstein creates a teenage female monster. The 1955 play Frankenstein and His Bride. In 1965, we have Frankenstein Created Woman, and Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter, in which the scientist's granddaughter is also a doctor with a god complex. The 1969 Frankenstein's Wives, the Italian 1972 Lady Frankenstein, where the Baron's daughter creates a monster, but now for her own sexual gratification. The 1976 play Bride of Frankenstein, 1978 Frankenstein's Rib, or two mentioned as penned by women, 1985 play Frankenstein's Wife, and the 1986 musical, which I really have to find, which is Have I Got a Girl for You, the Frankenstein musical. Finally, this next stage would address the possible influence of or intertextuality with James Whale's Bride in such aspects as his representation of Shelley or any female as a potential creator of monsters. Therefore, it is possible to conclude that the afterlives of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein are far from extinguished, that its creative and evocative power has not been exhausted, and that whether on or off stage, there are still many hideous progenies ahead. Thank you very much.